to hear my head roar. First, my father taught me to read poetry aloud. Then my teachers in grade school remembered how he had recited poetry, how many times he had brought down the schoolhouse with Casey at the bat. Whenever they could, they called me up before the whole school to be my father's son. I still dream of days they stood me shaking before my classmates, then waited while I launched into what they knew from long experience was coming, then sat through Jabberwocky or Excelsior. That was the full range of my repertory then. Later, I almost liked it, though I was still forced to it. Each week, we all recited at assembly. A terrible, tiring time that was for my audience and for me, as I recited The Highwayman and The Cremation of Sam McGee. My father coached as I recited nightly in the living room, and on the day of my graduation from that place, my sister and I recited, respectively, The Ballad of the Harp Weaver and The Highwayman. My sister and I fled to our father's side after it was over, and I can still see my sister blushing as the old ladies came up after the performance with tears in their eyes to tell my father he was wonderful. After that, it was a long time before my eyes would follow the tricks of poems, but now I know dozens of them. They unscroll behind my eyes, and I own hundreds of books in which I know I can always find the right thing at the right time, and I will read to anyone who doesn't know what he is in for hours at a time. When I try to understand this part of myself, I think back to that earlier troublesome time to find that the explanation of myself does not lie there entirely. For now I recall being in high school, just beginning to take myself seriously and my father as a human being, and I think of hours I spent in the attic, rummaging through old file cases, being surprised to find in the dark dust of that attic the poems my father had written when he was in college. One afternoon in the attic yielded an ancient treasure, a recording he had once made and then forgotten. I tiptoed out of the attic with it, thinking he might take it from me, and secretly I tried it, at first without success, on the machine downstairs in the living room. At last I even tried to start the reluctant machine on the inner end of the groove. It worked. The thing had been cut on some amateur's machine and was made to run from the inside out. I worked with the needle, nudging it over the cracks, and heard, after what seemed hours of work, a voice that I recognized through dusty cracks and 30 years as my father's or my own, say something I now take to heart as my heart cracks. "This is Tom Taylor talking, I heard him say, to hear his own voice and reading some poetry because he wants to have something to say." In this poem, I'm remembering something that happened to me a long time ago when someone was trying to teach me the difference between a pentagon and a hexagon and the rules for calculating the areas of figures like that. The poem is called Shapes, Vanishings. Down a street in the town where I went to high school 20-odd years ago, by doorways and shadows that change with the times, I walked past a woman at whose glance I almost stopped cold, almost to speak, to remind her of who I had been, but walked on, not being certain it was she, not knowing what I might find to say. It wasn't quite the face I remembered, the years being what they are, and I could have been wrong. But that feeling of being stopped cold, stopped dead, will not leave me, and I hark back to the thing I remember her for, though God knows how I could remind her of it now. Well, one afternoon when I was 15, I sat in her class. She leaned on her desk, facing us, the blackboard behind her arrayed with geometrical figures, triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon, etc. She pointed and named them. "The 5-sided figure," she said, "is a polygon." So far, so good. But then when she said, The six-sided one is a hexagon. I wanted things clear. 3 or more sides is poly, I knew, but 5 only is penta, and said so. She denied it, and I pressed the issue. I, with no grades to speak of, a miserable average to stand on with an Archimedean pole, no world to move either, just a fact to get straight, but she would have none of it, saying at last, "Are you contradicting me?" A small thing to remember a teacher for. Since then I have thought about justice often enough to have earned my uncertainty about what it is, but one hard fact from that day has stayed with me. If you're going to be a smart-ass, you have to be right, and not just some of the time. "Are you contradicting me?" she had said, and I stopped breathing a moment, the burden of her words pressing down through me hard and quick, the huge weight of knowing I was right and beaten. She had me. "No, ma'am," I managed to say, wishing I had the whole thing down on tape to play back to the principal, wishing I were 10 feet tall and never mistaken, ever, about anything in this world, wishing I were older and long gone from there. Now I am older and long gone from there. What sense in a grudge over something so small? What use to forgive her for something she wouldn't remember? Now students face me as I stand at my desk, and the shoe may yet find its way to the other foot, if it hasn't already. I couldn't charge 35 cents for all that I know of geometry. What little I learned is gone now, like a face looming up for a second out of years that dissolve in the mind like a single summer. Therefore, if ever she almost stops me again, I will walk on as I have done once already, remembering how we failed each other, knowing better than to blame anyone. Bernard and Sarah. "Hang them where they'll do some good," my grandfather said, as he placed the dusty photograph in my father's hands. My father and I stared at 2 old people, posed stiffly, side by side, my great-great-great-grandparents, in the days when photography was young and they were not. My father thought it out as we drove home. Deciding that they might do the most good somewhere out of sight, my father drove a nail into the back wall of his closet. They have hung there ever since, brought out only on such occasions as the marriage of one of his own children. "I think you ought to know the stock you're joining with," he says. Then back they go to the closet where they hang, keeping their counsel until it is called for. Yet, through walls, over miles of fields and woods that flourish still around the farm they cleared, their eyes light up the closet of my brain to draw me toward the place I started from, and when I have come home, they take me in. The narrator in this next poem imagines himself moving not only in time, but space. At one point, his sympathy for someone he sees makes him feel as if he is occupying that person's body. I mention this because the present tense is used throughout the poem, and the shifts, you need to know they're coming. It's called "My Grandfather Works in His Garden." My grandfather works in his garden today. The death that grows inside him draws him there to struggle with the death that takes away the only thing he keeps against despair. He sees me at the gate and comes to talk. He leans against a post. His eyes go small as he stares past me at a flower stalk. The years rise up between us like a wall. I say it is too hot for him. He shifts his weight toward me, but his eyes aim still beyond me. Then they change. The barrier lifts, disclosing shapes that I can only feel. As his eyes change, I am a boy once more, and seemed to see him straighten as one day he straightened when a man came to our door to tell him that our bull had got away, that someone ought to go and bring him back. I hear myself asking him not to go, but as I speak I feel my voice fall slack, reminding me that he already knew the way love sometimes will not let you keep a man from dangers that he knows are there. I watch him now as he goes down the steep porch steps and out the lane. For hours I stare at where I saw him last. The window glass, when he returns, dissolves to let me break from here to where the bull stands eating grass. I watch the old man wave a stick and speak to urge him up the lane. But when the bull turns and stands like stone, I become one with my grandfather. Before a standing still I cannot see him try to face alone. A hand grows tighter on the hickory cane. The bull walks toward a man who seems at once to stand inside, behind a window pane, and out here, in the path of that advance. I stand alone. I raise my cane up high and put my weight into swinging down to stop the march of that unblinking eye. Hickory snaps across a head of stone. The head comes on until it strikes my chest, and I fall back between those heavy hooves and close my eyes. Now I am slowly pressed into the ground as the great bull's weight moves to his head. I feel my grandfather's breath go slowly out of me. I brace my thumbs for one inspired last move. I clench my teeth against my whistling blood. My whole head hums. My hands move upward toward the bull's round eyes. I shove my thumbs in deep when I have found them, and just before the bull begins to rise, I feel his eyelids closing tight around them. My breath comes back with the window as the bull gets to his feet and blindly moves away. Until he is out of sight, my grandfather lies still, then rises slowly and slowly makes his way toward me. I run out to meet him at the gate he leans against. Green garden fills the space rising behind him as he shifts his weight and tells me it is hot. I touch his face. Blackberries. On top of a ragged hill on the farm next to my father's, an old man sat on his front porch and reigned over a dominion of thistles and briars. In his meadow, never mowed, blackberries grew wild, overran the field, smothered the grass, bound the cows, and ate them alive. My sisters and I would steal under his fence, armed with pails, to pick as many berries as we could. We never got them all, hard as we tried. One afternoon we stood in the briars reaching for berries over our heads, each one hanging before us like a bunch of grapes, when down from his porch the old man tumbled down the hill toward us, wild white hair in the wind, scattering all of his chickens as he ran. His tiny dog yapped at his heels. "Go back where you belong right now!" And he waved his arms. We turned and ran for the fence, clutching the pails in our arms, scattering berries behind us. We looked back once and saw him on the hill, shaking his fist in the wind and shouting, "If you too lazy to raise your own blackberries, by God, you shan't have mine." Riding lesson. I learned two things from an early riding teacher. He held a nervous filly in one hand and gestured with the other, saying, "Listen, keep one leg on one side, the other leg on the other side, and your mind in the middle." He turned and mounted. She took 2 steps, then left the ground, I thought, for good. But she came down hard, humped her back, swallowed her neck, and threw her rider as you'd throw a rock. He rose, brushed his pants and caught his breath and said, "See, that's the way to do it. When you see they gonna throw you, get off." This next poem is called December Love Song, and you have to remember that in the old days when the Lone Ranger was on the radio show always ended with The Lone Ranger and Tonto galloping off into their next adventure, and a handful of people standing around, some of whom don't know who that was. Who was that masked man, they want to know, and there's always some wiseacre in the group who knows, who says, "Why, he's the Lone Ranger," and just off in the distance then you can hear the Hi-Yo Silver away. Outside the diner, snow muffles the lighted street. You sit before me now, and I, through smoke and steam, stare at your lips, repeat not yours, but words I dream you send above the chink of forks and plates. I shrink, become a boy of 8 perched on a washing machine. Close to our inadequate and antiquated radio, I dream my ears as keen as those of stern-lipped Tonto, warning the Lone Ranger of imperceptible danger. All my childish wishes concentrate on static, the clatter of the dishes in the sink before my mother, the roar of the automatic washing machine, all other disruptive sounds that can drown out the tall masked man and the Indian, the sounds from good and bad guys' guns. My heart is out of bounds now, beyond the swinging door, beyond the cinnamon buns untouched on the plate before your eyes that try to reach beyond attempts at speech. Back with the drum of hooves, the note of recognition as the white horse Silver moves across the plain following the wind and the donation of the bullet in the bellowing of one proud man who knows the masked man and tells those who wondered who this was whose ringing voice is dying now. Outside, the snow is falling on the street, on eyes, the white horse Silver, lying on lips, your voice that tries to reach across this table, where it dies, drowned out in static air. A blind man locking his house. The tall clock in the hallway strikes the half-hour chime, 12:30. Now the hour has come for footsteps in the dark that like to wander through this house from room to room. My wife and I live here alone, so my wife thinks. But in the dark, my dark eye blinks. Down passageways of pure unknown, the hunter starts to stalk, and my heart sinks. I rise and gird myself to face this sounding house, one hand stretched out against the blows from chairs that will not stay in place, from anarchy that sightlessness allows, the other rummaging for keys in my coat pocket. At each door, as I pause to lock it, relentless blood assails my eyes and drives them crazy. Useless in their sockets, they still roll upward in my head. By force of will, I aim them downward. Through this chill, pretending to look straight ahead, I make those footsteps think I see, until between me and his heavy tread at least one door is safely locked. I pass from door to door and learn I am misled. There is no safe place for me anymore. To such thoughts does this presence tempt me, as floorboards creak, that I might drive myself to break my heart at last and find it empty because some thing stalks me and will not speak. The hallway clock clangs like my heart, in time with feet that flee and press behind and meet at last. And all of this is part of all this house. My pitiful conceit breaks down, and I shall not escape. Older than air or the stairway, he is somewhere in dust and stone that saps all hope. When I lie down, that sound will still be there. Time and again my wife has said no one is there. But in the weather of despair, as I climb up through dark to bed, I hear his step behind me on the stair. This one is called Breakings. There's a combine in it. It's not the kind of combine that comes rolling at people out of short features about the grain belt with their air-conditioned cabs. This is the kind that was hooked to a tractor. Somebody rode on the outside of it and had to bag the grain as it came down the chute. Nasty job. Dusty. Long before I first left home, my father tried to teach me horses, land, and sky, to show me how his kind of work was done. I studied how to be my father's son, but all I learned was, when the wicked die, they ride combines through barley forever. Every summer I hated my father as I drove hot horses through dusty grass, and so I broke with him and left the farm for other work, where unfamiliar weather broke on my head an unexpected storm, and things I had not studied came to pass. So nothing changes, nothing stays the same, and I have returned from a broken home alone to ask for a job breaking horses. I watch a colt on a long line making tracks in dust, and think of the kinds of breakings there are, and the kinds of restraining forces. This poem is spoken by a kind of crazy person who has come to believe that he can straighten out his life, particularly his love life, if only he can straighten out his pool game. It's called An Afternoon of Pocket Billiards. Here where there is neither hope nor haste, all my days blend. Each dark day is misplaced inside my crowded head. I try to beat a game, half chance, half cold and steady practice, struggling for the skill that might kill chance. But chance's claws take hold, the game is wrecked, and time is all I kill. No sleight of hand or heart can overcome the fear that in this darkness only time is not already dead. I narrow down my gaze to where I waste days growing used to a dusty taste that hangs in the dead air. Motes of chalk and talcum powder sift down past the hard edge of the swinging light above my table. Jukebox voices drift by me through the dark, raveled with a slight vibration from that older world beyond the window. Now I listen for a sound that may still rise somewhere this afternoon, away from here. My eyes wander from where I play to the motions of more skillful hands than mine. Another player leans above his cue. Between us, those old tremors seem to move the air I stare through, almost as if you were breathing here. That half-remembered love obscures the perfect shot I turn to watch. I turn back, but am caught between my past and the shifting design on a green field of order where I wait for time and strength of will to dissipate these shapes that coil and turn above the hush and click of herded spheres. Brief glimpses of a chain of treacheries flicker around a melody that bears into this room the gradual disease we fled when you tore blindly out our driveway for the last time, and I came here to play, to wait for your return, for this game's random shifts to bring you back or set me free. As I blunder through each rack, no two shots are the same. Yet if, beneath them all, dim certainties evolve to hold my called shots on a course that weaves beyond love's sudden vagaries, still, an impulse like love, in the force behind that wavering song, caroms my thought into an old mistake. With every shot I call, I speak your name. High and low, striped and solid balls rotate in endless formations as time grows late. My concentration breaks just at the dead-reckoned instant before each shot. Testing stroke and angle, I ease down on the felt and line it up once more. Too late, I feel that slight vibration seize my arm. Too late to stand. My knocking heart shatters skill and chance and takes the game apart. I make my own mistakes. I chalk my cue and call for one more rack, believing I might still untwist the wreck your song makes in my head. I think how spellbound bottom woke to shout through nightmare trees, "When my cue comes, call me, and I will answer." Your voice might find me out, note by note unraveling to recall me from this enchanted wood beyond your reach. When my cue comes, moving only by touch, I try to hold the thread, listening for the words to an old song that draws me down, sets me adrift among the patterns below the game. The words will not connect. Red blood and bone, older than love, the swirling echo drives me down below green felt toward solid stone, whose grains read out the sequence of my lives in sounds like underwater footsteps. My blind and whispering fingers stroke the stone to find strength to forget the shame I learned too long ago. I may be wrong to follow an ancient, dimly sounding song whose melody is fear, whose words might never speak. But now I know that in it, somewhere, forces of hand and will combine like dancers on a stage. And now, within the strictness of my touch, I feel a surge of steadiness. I rise to air, to dust and vacant noise, and old despair. Error still holds me here, but I'll be right someday. Though one song of old love has died away, an older song is falling into place. From now on I will play to make it speak, to see the form its words give to this game. I see, as I move into another rack, that all days in this cavern are the same, endless struggles to know how cold skill and a force like love can flow together in my veins and be at peace. Here, where there is neither hope nor haste, I narrow down my gaze to where I waste this afternoon away. On a green field of order where I wait for this game's random shifts to bring you back, high and low, striped and solid balls rotate. I chalk my cue and call for one more rack, listening for the words to an old song I learned too long ago. I may be wrong, but I'll be right someday. Now I'd like to read a handful of poems from a kind of interlude about a peculiar redneck individual named Desperado, who holds a lot of opinions that I don't share, and who has a lot of weird adventures. Some of them he has because I wish I could have them, and some of them he has because I don't want anybody to know that I have had them, and I'm not telling. Here's a kind of introduction to him. It's based on what I used to think was a popular superstition. It turns out not to be popular at all. Very few people have heard of it. But there is a belief that if you wake up with a terrific hangover, you can counteract it a little bit by dressing to the nines, as they say. If you can make the outside look really good, maybe the inside will come up to it. The title is He Sees by His Outfit. That comes from that old song, The Streets of Laredo, I see by your outfit that you are a cowboy. He stands before the mirror trying clothes. The pearl snap shirt he bought in Colorado might be enough to overcome the shadow that dropped in on his brain 2 nights ago and keeps his hands unsteady, keeps him slow to rise to any bait. Old Eldorado, the golden man, or mean, the white tornado? He'll be whatever he puts on, he knows. Somewhere inside him there might be a man in coveralls, his name sewn in red script above a pocket, his light touch tuned to cars. This blonde pulls in. He leans down with a grin just to make sure she comes fully equipped. "Back up here, ma'am, and let me have a look at them tars." When people take horses to the horse show, they sometimes are allowed to use what is called the outside course for practice. Cool women and smart horses are the pits. At a show one time, I don't know where we were, I saw this woman watching me school my horse. I spent that hour on the outside course thinking I'd like to put the tack on her. So when I got him tuned to a decent pitch, I quit and rode over to give her the eye. All she said was, "Does he ever wonder why he has to work so hard for you?" Too much Walter Farley in her childhood, I suppose. I said, "Most of 'em don't. I had one that did. So smart I had to shoot him in the head." Sometimes they fall for talk like that. She didn't. She misread me. Where she went, God only knows. But that was a great old horse. I guess he's dead. And here's a likely story from the further adventures of Desperado. A quasi-religious experience in a Ramada inn. Do not forget me. Somehow we came there, alone together, after years of days spent musing on the divergence of our ways. We lost no time recalling what we were, but fell to reinventing what we are. We found for fate some syllables of praise for having laid us down safely to graze the smooth skin, silent and spectacular. In that strange room were words, lips on a thigh, swift whir of silk across wide corduroy, light gathering to a point before your face. And later, on one elbow I lay by and listened while for my ferocious joy and enlightenment you sang Amazing Grace. This next Desperado takes its title from a phrase in a poem by Ralph Hodgson called The Bull. It's not a poem that anybody reads much anymore. His poem begins, "See an old unhappy bull, sick in soul and body both." And the second line is the title of this poem. Sick in soul and body both. Bulls have small brains. I stood at the pipe fence around my uncle's new concrete and steel bullpen and watched one of the residents push his forehead against the pipes until his front feet came up off the concrete walk and all his weight was on that 4-inch rail. He spoke to me. It wasn't human talk, but I could understand it pretty well. That fence was tight, but I gave a quick salute and came away from there. His brain was small, but he knew one thing. All he wanted to do was kill me. Men mean pain, and what I knew was, it can work both ways. I wanted to shoot that fucker just to see him jump and fall. This Desperado is about something that I used to have to do when I was younger. Whenever the blacksmith came to put shoes on the horses, somebody had to stand and hold the horses and keep the flies off of them so they wouldn't want to kick at them. When a shoe is fastened onto a horse's foot, the nail is driven through the dead, unfeeling wall of the hoof and emerges on the outside of the hoof about 3/4 of an inch above the shoe itself, and the end of the nail is clenched over into a kind of hook that holds the shoe in place. The blacksmith is holding the hoof in his hand, and he can feel the point of the nail begin to come through, and he knows where to put the hammer to break off the end and clench it down. One morning, shoeing horses. I hold a horse while the blacksmith nails a shoe in place, and think about how many years I've worked at this, watching the horse's ears for signs of what he might decide to do, touching his neck, turning his head to coax a little weight away from the lifted hoof, the fly-whisk light and always on the move, the soothing whispers tuned to hammer strokes. But I've been unsteady at it since a day like this some 10 years back when a driven nail got under the blacksmith's wedding ring, unclinched. There was a kind of roaring scream, the horse flinched and snatched his hoof, and there the finger lay, twitching a little, beside the water pail. Burning a horse. Riding on a flatbed wagon, carrying with us an axe, pitchforks, a coil of heavy rope, and a 5-gallon can of kerosene. We went to the back meadow that afternoon, driven to desperate measures by the stench that hung on the still air, dead air that lay like fog in the valley around us, not enough motion in it even to carry buzzards, whose random glide might have brought them to the body of the percheron that festered on the grass where we had dragged him after he had died. We spent an hour cutting brush from fallen trees, carrying it to where the horse lay bulging in the sun. We hooked him to the tractor and pulled him over the pile of brush to get it under him, then soaked the brush pile and his body with the kerosene. I threw a match into the trembling vapors that rose from the fuel and from the rotting horse, then dropped back as the explosion blasted us with the smell of burning hair. Slowly, one patch of skin, then another, burned through to let the gas escape and blaze like a blowtorch. But the flames died down too soon, and we could hear the flesh speaking, one of the men said, as a cornfield does, growing after a hard rain. We ran up to the pyre with more brush, holding our breath as we used pitchforks to place the dry sticks where they seemed needed most, and then saw fire catch the wood, the flesh, and saw black smoke so thick and heavy that it hid us from each other. It crawled down the meadow a few feet above the ground, the smell we held our breath against, tainting everything it touched. Burning at last, the horse was blackening and shrinking into the tall meadow grass, and then, before us, there, from coals that had caught hold in the horse's bones, we saw a horse made whole, with heavy flesh and shining skin rippling against the pull, rising from the grass around the dying fire, his new hoofs shod, his mane flying, rising from the coals and moving in a smooth and dangerous way. He traveled down the meadow at a sweeping gallop, wrapped in something like a flame, light and heat around him that did not flicker or drop from him as he disappeared. The sun rolled down the hill above the meadow, and in the dusk a wind came up. We strained our eyes, but the horse was gone, moving perhaps beyond the stand of willow trees at the upper end of the meadow, carrying the light around him into darkness beyond our view. We turned to look at the spot where the fire had been, listening for the crackling of smoldering bones, but all we heard was our own blood and breath and the sound of the wind that must have carried him away. Ashes lifted slowly in that wind like heavy wings. Riding a one-eyed horse. One side of his world is always missing. You may give it a casual wave of the hand, or rub it with your shoulder as you pass, but nothing on his blind side ever happens. Hundreds of trees slip past him into darkness, drifting into a hollow hemisphere whose sounds you will have to try to explain. Your legs will tell him not to be afraid if you learn never to lie. Do not forget to turn his head and let what comes come seen. He will jump the fences he has to if you swing toward them from the side that he can see and hold his good eye straight. The heavy dark will stay beside you always. Let him learn to lean against it. It will steady him and see you safely through diminished fields. The flying change. The canter has two stride patterns, one on the right lead and one on the left, each a mirror image of the other. The leading foreleg is the last to touch the ground before the moment of suspension in the air. On cantered curves, the horse tends to lead with the inside leg. Turning, at liberty, he can change leads without effort during the moment of suspension, but a rider's weight makes this more difficult. The aim of teaching a horse to move beneath you is to remind him how he moved when he was free. A single leaf turns sideways in the wind in time to save a remnant of the day. I am lifted like a whip crack to the moves I studied on that barbered stretch of ground before I schooled myself to drift away from skills I still possess but must outlive. Sometimes when I cup water in my hands and watch it slip away and disappear, I see that age will make my hands a sieve. But for the moment, the shifting world suspends its flight and leans toward the sun once more, as if to interrupt its mindless plunge through works and days that will not come again. I hold myself immobile in bright air, sustained in time astride the flying change. In this next poem, there are a couple of references to a piece of machinery called a bush hog, which is a kind of giant rotary mower that you hook to a tractor, and it cuts about a 4 to 6 foot swath depending on the size of the machine. It's used for keeping weeds and thistles down in large fields. The poem is called Landscape with Tractor. How would it be if you took yourself off to a house set well back from a dirt road with, say, 3 acres of grass bounded by road, driveway, and vegetable garden? Spring and summer you would mow the field not down to lawn, but with a bush hog every 6 weeks or so, just often enough to give grass a chance and keep weeds down. And one day, call it August, hot, a storm recently passed, things green and growing a bit, and you're mowing with half your mind on something you'd rather be doing or did once. 3 rounds and then on the straight alongside the road, maybe 3 swaths in from where you are now, you glimpse it. People will toss all kinds of crap from their cars. It's a clothing store dummy, for God's sake. Another 2 rounds and you'll have to stop, contend with it, at least pull it off to one side. You keep going. 2 rounds more, then down off the tractor, and Christ, not a dummy, a corpse. The field tilts, whirls, then steadies as you run. Telephone, sirens. 2 local doctors use pitchforks to turn the body some 4 days dead and ripening. And the cause of death no mystery. 2 bullet holes in the breast of a well-dressed black woman in perhaps her mid-30s. They wrap her, take her away. You take the rest of the day off. Next day you go back to the field, having to mow over the damp dent in the tall grass where bluebottle flies are still swirling, but the bush hog disperses them and all traces. Weeks pass. You hear at the post office that no one comes forward to say who she was. Brought out from the city, they guess, and dumped like a bag of beer cans. She was someone, and now is no one, buried or burned or dissected, but gone. And I ask you again, how would it be to go on with your life, putting gas in the tractor, keeping down thistles, and seeing each time you pass that spot the form in the grass, the bright yellow skirt, black shoes, the thing not quite like a face whose gaze blasted past you at nothing when the doctors heaved her over? To wonder from now on what dope deal, betrayal, or innocent refusal brought her here, and to know she will stay in that field till you die. This poem has something to do with the way people can say dumb things and sound momentarily profound. It's called Somewhere Along the Way. You lean on a wire fence, looking across a field of grain with a man you have stopped to ask for directions. You're not lost. You stopped here only so you could take a moment to see whatever this old farmer sees, who crumbles heads of wheat between his palms. Rust is lifting the red paint from his barn roof, and earth hardens over the sunken arc of his mower's iron wheel. All his sons have grown and moved away, and the old woman keeps herself in the parlor where the light is always too weak to make shadows. He sniffs at the grain in his hand and cocks an ear toward a dry tree ringing with cicadas. There are people dying today, he says, that never died before. He lifts an arm and points, saying what you already knew about the way you were trying to go. You nod and thank him and think of going on, but only after you have stood and listened a little while longer to the soft click of the swaying grain heads soon to be cut, and the low voice, edged with dim prophecy, that settles down around you like the dust. There is a way of putting a blade of grass between your thumbs that turns it into a kind of primitive reed instrument. You blow on it and you can elicit a whistle or a squawk or a number of loud noises, useful at baseball games. Hawk. Last year I learned to speak to a red-tailed hawk. He wheeled above me as I crossed a field. He screamed. I pulled a blade of grass, set it against my lips, and started screaming back. We held that conversation for half a mile. Once in a while he calls me out of the house, and I comb a border for the right blade of grass. I used to wish I might learn what it is we mean to one another. Now I keep the noise we've mastered for itself alone, for glimpses of his descent toward dead elms, and a heart that will not mind when I am gone. Heartburn. It is not middle age, you tell yourself, getting up from the table without breathing too deeply, lest breath stir the fire in your gut. It's not crotchety digestion flaring up after years of eating incautiously. You've burned like this after dinner since you were 17 years old, when they stood you in front of a screen in a dark room, and two men in green coats watched as radioactive chalk drink swirled in the faint light that picked out their gray faces. But the thing gets harder to live with, and you spend more ill-tempered time these days, clawing in the dark room for the tail end of the pack of Rolaids that must be somewhere, in one of the tweed coats maybe that haven't been worn for months, and you picture yourself in a pith helmet hacking trails to the heart of the treacherous closet. So, get up, put on what comes to hand, and go out, down the dark drive to the gate, where you lean and look out over fields at the mountain, and beyond it to the soft dome of cloud light suspended above the city some 50 miles away. Not far, yet as bright as it looms, you remember that right here a black cow has been lying dead for weeks at the foot of the bank below the drive, having fallen down into the stream when a section of the stone culvert caved in, and the rock that pins her is bound to weigh over a ton, so she'll be there, pulsating with maggots, drawing the local vermin out of the woods, until someday the bones are clean enough to pick up and ponder. Dark as it is, you walk down to her now, catch a whiff of her, and for some reason the moil in your stomach subsides. It is only farm death, the sound and smell you've known all your life. Still, you indulge for a few moments the notion that one day you too might end up with your head in a creek, under a rock, crushed into the earth you once found other ways of wishing to merge with. Listen. The night wind is not strong, but now it catches a dead leaf just right, whips it against a twig, making it sound like a train in a dream, clicking out some message in code, as if such things could speak to your heart. But that leaf is as dead as the cow, and the cow is about the deadest thing you can think of in this vicinity. Turn then, and guess for a little while at the house lights tricked out on the side of the mountain where people may be watching TV or thinking, as you do, that the time may be coming for some sort of change. And the thought fans the flame in your belly. Your grip tightens on the rail of the gate. Now tears, as you look up at the sky, make the stars seem to speak with more meaning than they possess. And they say that whatever you burn for, some plausible answers to the momentous questions you can't even think of, or only an uncomplicated evening in bed with someone you have no true claim to. You almost had hold of it once, but now you recall it imperfectly. If you need a change, just stand here, by God, and you'll get it. So turn once again, back up the driveway, thinking, as lately you've come to, that you can still make a wrong step on rough ground in the dark and not quite cripple yourself. Porch lights, left on to show the way home, shine right in your eyes, and you can't see a thing, but you'll get there. This is a poem that came out of a time when I was suddenly forced to realize the awesome simultaneity of the splendid and the terrible. At the Swings. Mid-afternoon in Norfolk, late July. I am taking our two sons for a walk away from their grandparents' house. We have directions to a miniature playground, and I have plans to wear them down toward a nap at 5, when my wife and I will leave them a while with her father. A few blocks south of here, my wife's mother drifts from us beneath hospital sheets, her small strength bent to the poisons and the rays they use against a spreading cancer. In their house now, deep love is studying to live with deepening impatience as each day gives our hopes a different form, and household tasks rise like a powdery mist of restless fatigue. Still, at 5, my wife and I will dress and take the boulevard across the river to a church where two dear friends will marry. Rings will be blessed, promises kept and made, and while our sons lie down to sleep, the groom's niece, as the flower girl, will almost steal the show. But here the boys have made an endless procession on the slides, shrieking down slick steel almost too hot to touch, and now they charge the swings. I push them from the front, one with each hand, until at last the rhythm and the sunlight that splashes through live oak and crepe myrtle, dappling dead leaves on the ground, lull me away from this world toward a state still and remote as an old photograph in which I am standing somewhere I may have been before. There was this air, this light, a day of thorough and forgetful happiness. Where was it, or how long ago? I try to place it, but it has gone for good, to leave me gazing at these swings, thinking of something else I may have recognized, an irrecoverable certainty that now and now, this perfect afternoon, while friends are struggling to put on their cutaways or bridal gowns, and my wife's mother, dearer still, is dozing after her medicine or turning a small thing in her mind like someone worrying a ring of keys to make small sounds against great silence. And while these two boys swing back and forth against my hand, time's crosshairs quarter me no matter where I turn. Now it is time to go. The boys are tired enough, and my wife and I must dress and go to church. Because I love our friends and ceremony, the usual words will make me weep. Hearing the human prayers for holy permanence will remind me that a life is much to ask of anyone, yet not too much to give to love. And once or twice as I stand there, that dappled moment at the swings will rise between the lines, when I beheld our sons, as, in the way of things, they will not be again, though even years from now their hair may lift a little in a breeze, as if they stood somewhere along their way from us, poised for a steep return.